"I'll come every night," joked the rancher. The young Apache woman replied, "Show it, don't tell it." Dusty winds blew across the dry fields surrounding the small ranch, carrying the smell of dry grass and cattle. The rancher, a man in his late 40s named Tom, was walking along the edge of his property. His boots kicked up small clouds of dust with every step, and the soft creak of his old leather belt echoed in the quiet of the early evening. Tom had spent his entire life in this area. He knew every hill, every tree, and every fence post on his land. But tonight, as he walked along the boundary, his mind was elsewhere. A few miles away, on the edge of the reservation, a young Apache woman named Ayana was tending to her small garden. She was 17, strong and careful with every movement. Her dark hair was tied back neatly, and her hands, though young, were skilled and precise. She had grown up learning the ways of her people, how to take care of the land, how to plant and harvest crops, and how to respect the animals around her. Yana was aware of the ranch that bordered her family's land. She often noticed the occasional shadow moving across the horizon, or the sound of boots on dirt that did not belong to her family. But she had learned early on to keep her distance, to observe quietly, and to trust only those she knew well. This evening, fate seemed to draw them toward each other. Tom had been checking the fence lines, making sure nothing had been broken by the cattle or the wind. As he moved closer to the border, he spotted a figure kneeling near the edge of the small plot of land. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, the sun reflecting off a tool or a piece of clothing. But as he came closer, he realized it was a young woman, quietly working in the soil. Tom slowed his pace and watched her for a moment. He could see how careful she was, how her hands moved with purpose, planting seeds and gently pressing them into the ground. There was something graceful about her movements, and despite her youth, he could see the determination in her eyes. She noticed him at the same time, and for a moment they just stared at each other. Neither moved, and the wind seemed to pause around them. Finally Tom spoke, his voice soft and polite. "Evening," he said. "Hope I'm not disturbing you." Yana looked up fully, her expression calm but alert. "You're on your own land," she replied carefully. Her voice was steady, but there was a quiet strength in it. She didn't raise her voice, but Tom felt the weight of her words. He nodded, understanding that this was not the kind of encounter where words alone mattered. "I'm just checking the fences," Tom said. "Don't want any of my cattle wandering into your garden." Yana gave a small nod, acknowledging his explanation. "I don't want any of your cattle here either," she replied. Her tone was firm but not harsh. There was an unspoken understanding that they both respected boundaries, even if they came from different worlds. For a few moments they continued to watch each other quietly. The air was warm but dry, and the smell of the earth mixed with the faint scent of sage and dry grass. Tom was the first to break the silence. "You work fast," he said, attempting a small smile. "You're very careful with your plants." Yana looked at him, a hint of curiosity in her eyes. "I have to be," she said simply. "If I'm not careful, they won't grow." Tom nodded, impressed despite himself. There was something about her honesty that was refreshing. In his life, he had met many people who talked more than they acted. But this young woman spoke little, yet her work told a story. He realized that actions, indeed, spoke louder than words. Over the next few minutes, they talked quietly about small things, the weather, the challenges of dry land, and the effort it took to care for the soil. There was no rush in their conversation, and each word felt measured. Tom found himself enjoying the calm presence of someone who was so different from the people he usually met. He was used to the busy chatter of the town, the constant demands of neighbors and business, but here, there was quiet, and it felt almost peaceful. Yana, too, was aware of his presence. She had grown up near the edges of the ranch and knew the people who lived there. Most of them were polite enough, but she had also seen arrogance and carelessness. This man, however, seemed different. He watched, he spoke politely, and he didn't overstep his welcome. Still, she remained cautious. She had learned that trust was earned, not given, and that appearances could be deceiving. As the sun dipped lower, the sky turned a brilliant orange and pink, casting long shadows across the land. Tom realized he had spent far longer near the boundary than he intended. He had come to check fences, but he had found himself drawn to this quiet interaction. He didn't know why, but there was something about Ayanna that felt different, important even in a subtle way. Before leaving, Tom straightened up and spoke again. "Well, I better get back before it gets too dark. It's easy to lose your way out here." Ayanna nodded again. "Take care," she said. Her voice was calm, but there was a gentle firmness in it, a quiet confidence that reminded Tom of why he had respected her from the moment he saw her. As he walked back toward his ranch, Tom found himself thinking about the encounter. He had come expecting nothing more than a routine check of fences, but instead, he had met someone whose presence lingered in his mind. He realized that in this vast and often lonely landscape, moments like these were rare. And for reasons he didn't fully understand yet, he wanted to see her again. Meanwhile, Ayanna returned to her work, but her mind wandered. The man had been polite, careful, and surprisingly patient, yet she reminded herself not to trust too quickly. Life on the reservation had taught her that people could change, and not everyone meant what they said. Still, there was something about him, something that didn't feel like the usual arrogance or carelessness she had seen from outsiders. She would remember this encounter, and perhaps, she thought, it might be the beginning of a cautious friendship, or something more. As night approached, both returned to their homes. The rancher tended to his cattle, and the young woman helped her family prepare for the evening. But in the quiet moments, both replayed the encounter in their minds. Words had been exchanged, yes, but it was more than words. It was respect, observation, and a silent understanding of boundaries and intentions. Neither realized it yet, but this brief meeting would mark the start of a connection that would grow slowly, carefully, and meaningfully over time. In the days to come, Tom would find himself checking the fences more often, sometimes hoping to see the young woman working quietly in her garden. And Ayanna, while careful not to let her curiosity show, would notice when the man's shadow appeared near the boundary. Their paths had crossed by chance, but in the vast openness of the land, such crossings often carried weight far beyond the moment. That evening, as the stars began to pierce the dark sky, both felt an unfamiliar sense of anticipation. It was not excitement in the way of frivolous pleasure, but a quiet awareness that something important had begun. A connection had been made, not through promises or words, but through observation, respect, and the simple act of sharing space without intrusion. And in the silence that fell over the land, both understood that there was more to come, though neither yet knew what it would be. The next morning, the desert air was cool, carrying the faint scent of earth and sage after a brief night breeze. Tom woke early, as he always did, before the sun fully rose. The ranch never slept, and there were always chores that demanded attention, checking the cattle, fixing fences, and making sure the water troughs were full. But even as he went about his work, his mind drifted to the young woman he had met the evening before. He remembered the way she had moved through her garden, precise and quiet, her hands pressing seeds into the soil with care. There had been no hesitation in her work, no wasted motion. It was the kind of focus and discipline that only came from knowing the land intimately. Tom realized that she had a strength beyond her years, and he found himself curious about her life, her family, and the traditions she carried so naturally. Meanwhile, Ayanna was awake with the first light. She helped her family with morning chores, feeding the small number of animals they kept and fetching water from the well. Her thoughts, however, kept returning to the rancher. She could not explain why, but there was something about him that seemed different. Polite, careful, and observant, he did not treat her as if she were weak or inexperienced. That was rare, and it caught her attention. Still, she reminded herself to remain cautious. People, especially those from outside her world, could say one thing and mean another. Trust, she reminded herself, had to be earned. Over the next several days, Tom found himself wandering near the boundary more often. Sometimes it was under the pretense of checking fences or inspecting the cattle, but other times it was simply curiosity that drew him. He wanted to see her, not to intrude but to observe, to learn more about this young woman who had captured his attention with her quiet strength. Each time he approached, he noticed the same careful routine. She would work slowly, planting or tending to the small crops, pausing occasionally to inspect the soil or check the water. She worked with such diligence that Tom felt a mix of admiration and humility. Here was someone who had a life full of responsibility and skill, and yet she did it without complaint or need for praise. One afternoon, Tom decided to speak to her again, hoping to build a friendly connection. "You're very dedicated," he said, keeping his voice calm. "It's not easy work." Yana looked up, her eyes steady and cautious. "It's work that needs to be done," she replied. "The land won't care if it's easy or hard." Tom smiled, appreciating her straightforward answer. There was honesty in her words, and he liked that. "You're right," he admitted. "It doesn't care and it demands attention. I've learned that the hard way." There was a pause, a quiet moment where they simply watched each other and the land around them. It was a shared understanding, silent but meaningful. In that silence, Tom realized that he had begun to respect her not just for her skill but for her character. She had patience, discipline, and a quiet confidence that he found rare and admirable. Yana, too, noticed the man's consistency. He came day after day quietly, without unnecessary chatter or boasting. He helped when he could, offering small assistance, fixing a broken fence post here, carrying water there. At first she had been skeptical, unsure if he could be trusted, but his actions slowly began to prove his sincerity. In her experience, words alone were cheap. Actions were what mattered. One day, Tom arrived while a few clouds hung in the sky, promising rain. He carried a small bag of tools and some supplies, intending to help with a fence that had weakened in a recent windstorm. "I thought you might need some help with this section," he said, pointing to the broken posts. Yana studied him for a moment, evaluating his intentions. Then she nodded. "Thank you," she said. "It will go faster with help, but be careful. The land can be tricky." Together, they worked on the fence. Tom lifted heavy posts while Ayanna held them steady and hammered nails with precision. They worked side by side, not talking much but each aware of the other's presence. It was a rhythm, a silent teamwork that began to build trust without needing words. By the time they finished, the sun was high, casting a warm glow across the landscape. "You did well," Tom said, wiping sweat from his brow. "I couldn't have done it alone." Yana smiled faintly. "I could have done it alone," she said, "but it's faster with two, and careful work matters more than speed." Her words struck Tom. He realized that this was not someone who sought attention or approval. She valued quality and care, and she lived by principles that guided her actions. It was refreshing, humbling even, for someone used to the casual ways of the ranching world. Over the next few weeks, their interactions became routine. Tom would visit with small offers of help or simply to check on the land, and Ayanna would observe his actions. Occasionally, they would exchange light conversation about daily life, how the crops were growing, the health of the animals, or the challenges of the hot, dry summer. But even in these small interactions, the connection deepened. Words were limited, but trust grew steadily. One evening, as the sun began to set, Tom made a joke, trying to lighten the mood. "I'll come every night," he said with a grin, intending to be playful. Yana paused, her eyes meeting his. There was a small smile on her lips, but her voice was calm and deliberate. "Show it, don't tell it," she said. The words were simple, but their weight was not lost on Tom. He understood immediately that she valued action over promises. Words could be empty, Deeds were what truly mattered. He nodded, accepting the challenge without needing to reply further. From that moment, Tom focused on proving his sincerity. He became more consistent in his efforts, ensuring that any assistance he offered was meaningful. Jana watched carefully, noticing when he took extra care or when he went beyond what was expected. Slowly, the respect that had begun in their first encounter transformed into something more solid, a quiet acknowledgement of each other's dedication and character. As the days passed, the rancher and the young woman began to share more than work. They shared observations about the land, stories about their families, and small personal insights. Tom learned about Ayana's childhood, how she had learned from her elders to respect the land and the animals, and how her family survived with skill and resilience. Yana learned about the rancher's life, how he had grown up with cattle and fences, and how he had come to respect the persistence and patience the land required. One afternoon, a sudden summer storm rolled in. Dark clouds filled the sky and the wind picked up, sending dust and leaves swirling through the air. Tom and Ayana sought shelter under a large tree, watching as the first drops of rain began to fall. The storm was brief but intense, drumming on the earth with a steady rhythm. In that quiet moment, they felt a shared sense of connection, two people from different worlds, facing the same elements, relying on care and cooperation rather than words alone. When the storm passed, the land smelled fresh and earthy. Tom helped Ayana check the crops and repair minor damage caused by the wind. It was a simple act, but it strengthened the trust between them. Ayana realized that this man, once a stranger, was now someone who could be counted on. Tom realized that the young woman, once cautious and reserved, was now someone whose opinion and respect mattered deeply to him. Evening fell, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Tom returned to his ranch, tired but satisfied. Yana watched him leave, a sense of calm and curiosity lingering in her mind. Neither of them spoke about the day, yet both knew that something significant had begun, a slow, steady building of trust, respect, and understanding. In the weeks that followed, their interactions became more natural. Laughter occasionally broke through their conversations, small jokes were shared, and silent teamwork became second nature. Tom's playful remarks were met with measured responses from Ayana, who appreciated honesty and effort over flattery. And while both remained cautious, they could not ignore the growing bond between them, a connection built not on promises, but on consistent, reliable actions. By the time summer began to fade, the two had established a rhythm. Tom continued to help with the land when needed, and Ayana welcomed his assistance without losing her independence or dignity. Each day added a layer of understanding and respect, proving that trust could grow even across different worlds, as long as actions spoke louder than words. The boundary between the ranch and the reservation was no longer just a line of fences and dirt. It had become a meeting place, a shared space where two people were learning about each other's lives, cultures, and values. And in that shared space, a story was quietly unfolding, one that would shape both their lives in ways neither of them could yet imagine. The weeks that followed had brought a rhythm to their lives, but it also brought new challenges. Summer was ending, and with it came unpredictable weather and the need to prepare for the harsher months ahead. Tom and Ayana had become familiar with each other's presence, and while there was respect and trust between them, neither had yet shared the deeper sides of their lives. That was about to change, though neither of them realized it. One morning, the wind carried a chill that hinted at the approaching autumn. Tom rose earlier than usual, feeling the weight of the day ahead. There was a section of fence near the reservation line that had been weakened by the recent storms, and the cattle were restless, sensing the coming change in weather. He knew he had to fix it before anything went wrong. As he walked toward the boundary, he noticed Ayanna already outside, tending to the crops with the same careful precision she always used. "Morning," he called softly, not wanting to startle her. "Morning," she replied, her voice steady. There was a small smile on her lips, the kind that carried warmth without losing its caution. Tom approached, carrying his tools and a few supplies for the fence repair. "The storm left this section weak," he said. "I want to make sure your crops and the cattle are safe." Ayanna looked at the damaged fence and then back at him. "Thank you," she said. "We should work together on this." They moved toward the section of fence side by side. As they worked, hammering nails and replacing broken posts, there was a shared sense of purpose. Neither needed to talk much, their movements synchronized naturally. Each action showed care, effort, and attention to detail. In these moments, words seemed almost unnecessary. Yet as they worked, Tom sensed a shift in the atmosphere. Ayanna was quieter than usual, her focus sharper, almost as if she were guarding her thoughts. He knew that there were parts of her life she did not share easily, and he did not want to push too quickly. He decided to give her space, concentrating instead on the work in front of them. By midday, the fence was repaired, standing straight and strong against the wind. They stepped back to admire their work. "It looks good," Tom said, smiling. Ayanna nodded. "It does," she replied. "Better than before." For a moment, they simply looked at each other, both aware of the unspoken connection that had grown between them. The quiet of the land, the gentle rustling of leaves, and the distant sounds of the cattle created a calm backdrop. Tom realized that this young woman had become more than a neighbor in the boundary line. She was someone who had opened a door to understanding a world he had only glimpsed from the edges. A few days later, something unexpected happened. A fire had started on the far side of the reservation. At first, it was small, a thin line of smoke rising from the dry brush. But the wind was strong and the fire began to spread quickly. Ayanna's family alerted her immediately and she ran toward the danger, knowing the land and the animals needed protection. Tom, seeing the smoke from his ranch, hurried to the border. The scene was tense. Flames licked the dry grass and smoke filled the sky. Without hesitation, he grabbed buckets of water from the nearby well and ran toward the area where Ayanna and her family were trying to contain the fire. Together, they worked side by side. Ayanna directed the effort, telling her family where to throw water, which brush to cut, and how to protect the crops. Tom followed her instructions carefully, trusting her knowledge and instincts. The fire was dangerous, but through their combined efforts, they managed to keep it from spreading to the crops and homes. When the last flame was extinguished, they stood panting, covered in soot and sweat. The danger had passed, and yet the experience had brought them closer. Ayanna looked at Tom, her eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and respect. "You didn't have to help," she said quietly. "I wanted to," Tom replied. "I couldn't just stand and watch." Her small nod said more than words could. She recognized that his actions were genuine, that he had risked effort and energy to help, not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. In that moment, the playful words from weeks earlier, "I'll come every night," seemed to take on a deeper meaning. Actions and deeds spoke louder than promises. After the fire, the land needed attention. Crops were trampled, fences needed further repair, and the soil had to be tended carefully to recover. Tom continued to work alongside Ayanna, helping where he could, learning from her methods and sharing his own skills. Over time, she began to trust not just his presence, but his judgment. Decisions that once would have been made solely by her or her family now included his perspective. Their teamwork became more than practical cooperation. It was a shared understanding, a rhythm that neither could force but had developed naturally. The trust between them was no longer tentative. It had been tested by challenge and proven through consistent action. Both realized that respect and reliability mattered more than words or promises. One afternoon, As the autumn wind swept through the land, Tom decided to take a small risk. He approached Ayanna while she was working on the crops and said with a grin, "I think I've proven I can keep my word, at least with fences and fires." Ayanna looked at him, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "Words are easy," she replied, "but I'll believe it when I see it in everything you do." The challenge in her tone was clear, but so was the trust beneath it. Tom smiled, understanding that this was the point. His actions mattered more than his speech. He had to continue showing his sincerity every day through effort, consistency, and care. As the days grew shorter and the nights cooler, the seasons shifted. Both were aware that winter would bring harsher conditions, more work, and challenges that would test their efforts and patience. Yet, in spite of the difficulties, there was a sense of anticipation and quiet excitement. They had learned to rely on each other, not just for practical tasks but for understanding, respect, and mutual support. During this time, small personal stories began to emerge. Ayanna shared memories of her grandparents, the lessons they had taught her about land, life, and community. Tom told stories of his own childhood on the ranch, about his parents' work ethic, and the values that had shaped him. These moments were not just casual conversation. They were building bridges between two very different worlds. Each story, each shared memory, added depth to their growing connection. One day, as they walked along the newly repaired fence, Ayanna spoke quietly. "You've changed how I see outsiders," she said. "Most people would just cross the land and make noise. You pay attention." Tom looked at her, touched by the honesty of her words. "I could say the same about you," he replied. "You've shown me a way to work with the land, with patience and with care. I've learned more than I expected." It was a rare moment of vulnerability, where both acknowledged the effect they had on each other. For Tom, it was a reminder that respect must be earned and maintained. For Ayanna, it was a recognition that people could be trusted when they showed consistency, honesty, and genuine effort. By the end of this period, something subtle had changed between them. The playful interactions, the light teasing, and the cautious observation had transformed into a deeper understanding. They had faced challenges together, storms, fires, and the simple tests of everyday work, and emerged with trust that went beyond surface gestures. Words had been spoken, yes, but they now mattered less than the actions that accompanied them. Tom had begun to understand the full weight of Ayanna's phrase, "Show it, don't tell it." It was not a rejection of friendship or kindness. It was a reminder that actions were the true measure of character. And in every task he undertook, from repairing fences to helping with crops, he carried that lesson with him. Ayanna, too, saw that words could be hollow without consistent effort. Tom's presence, his willingness to work, and his respect for her and her family had proven that he was sincere. And while she remained cautious, always aware of the lessons her elders had taught her, she allowed herself to see the potential of a meaningful connection built on trust, shared responsibility, and mutual respect. As autumn settled fully over the land, painting it in shades of gold and brown, both recognized that this chapter of their lives had brought a turning point. They had crossed the threshold from casual acquaintance to mutual respect. What had begun as a simple meeting at a fence line had grown into a partnership of action, understanding, and shared effort, a foundation upon which something lasting could be built. In this way, the lessons of the land, the seasons, and each other had taken root. Words were still spoken, but action spoke louder. Challenges would continue to arise, but both were ready to face them together, knowing that true trust and understanding were not given. They were earned, day by day, moment by moment, with effort, care, and integrity. Autumn was settling over the land, painting the horizon in warm shades of orange, red, and brown. The mornings were crisp, and the nights were growing colder, carrying the first hints of winter in the air. Tom woke early as usual, his mind already planning the day ahead. The past months had built a rhythm between him and Ayanna, working together on fences, tending to crops, and even facing dangers like storms and fire. But with trust came new challenges, some small, some more significant, and the consequences of their actions were beginning to appear. That morning, Tom noticed smoke rising faintly on the horizon. At first, it seemed distant, but as he approached the boundary of his ranch, the smell of burning brush grew stronger. Ayanna was already outside, surveying the land with keen eyes. She had noticed the smoke as well, and the tension in her stance told Tom this was serious. "Looks like the north field is burning again," she said, her voice steady but urgent. Tom nodded. "We need to act fast." Without hesitation, they gathered buckets, tools, and anything they could use to contain the fire. But this time it was different. The fire was stronger, fueled by dry leaves and strong wind. They worked quickly, but the danger was higher, and mistakes could cost more than just the crops. Tom realized that their previous experiences had prepared them, but not fully. The stakes were greater now, and both had to act carefully. As they approached the blaze, they could see how close it was to Ayanna's family's small storage shed. "We have to protect that first," she said, directing her family members to move important items to safety. Tom assisted, carrying heavy supplies while carefully watching the flames. Every decision mattered. One wrong step could worsen the situation. Together, they formed a small team. Ayanna directed, Tom executed, and her family followed instructions with precision. The fire tested not only their physical skills but also their ability to trust each other under pressure. Each act was deliberate, each choice measured. The hours passed, and finally, after relentless effort, the fire was brought under control. By evening, the sun had dipped below the horizon and both were exhausted. Soot covered their clothes and hands, their faces streaked with sweat and ash. But they had succeeded. Nothing of great value had been lost, and the land was safe, for now. Ayanna looked at Tom, her expression a mixture of gratitude, respect, and something else she couldn't name yet. "You didn't have to risk yourself," she said softly. "I did," he replied simply, "because it mattered, because it was right." Her eyes held his gaze for a long moment. In her world, words were cheap and actions spoke louder. She had watched him, seen him act without hesitation, and realized that his presence was meaningful. This understanding deepened the bond they had begun building over months. The fire, however, had consequences. Some of the crops were scorched, fences damaged, and the soil needed tending. Tom and Ayanna spent the following days working tirelessly to repair the land. Every action now had weight. A broken fence could let cattle wander, a missed crop could affect food for the family, and carelessness could undo the trust they had worked so hard to build. Neighbors and others in the nearby ranching community began to notice Tom's consistent presence near the reservation boundary. Whispers started, some filled with curiosity, some with judgment. Some wondered why he spent so much time there, why he seemed so committed to helping Ayanna and her family. Ayanna noticed the curious glances as well, and she reminded herself to stay cautious. Not everyone had good intentions, and attention from outsiders often brought unwanted complications. Despite the scrutiny, their work continued. Tom became more careful in how he approached the land and interacted with the young woman and her family. He realized that trust was fragile and could be damaged easily by careless words or actions. Ayanna, too, maintained her awareness. She appreciated his help and presence, but she never allowed herself to forget the lessons her elders had taught her: respect, vigilance, and the importance of observing intentions before fully trusting someone. One evening, after a long day repairing fences and tending the soil, Tom and Ayanna sat near the boundary, watching the sun set behind the distant cliffs. The sky was painted in gold and violet, the wind carrying a soft chill. "You've changed things," Ayanna said quietly. "Not just for me, but for the land, too. Your help, it matters." Tom looked at her, feeling the weight of her words. "I didn't do it for recognition," he said. "I did it because it was the right thing to do. I wanted to help, and I wanted to show respect to you and your family." Her gaze softened slightly. "Respect is earned," she replied. "And you've earned some of mine, but remember, actions matter more than words. I can see effort, care, and honesty. Those are things that last." Tom nodded, understanding completely. Her words were a reminder that what they were building was fragile but meaningful. Every choice, every act, shaped the connection between them, and there was no room for carelessness. The days that followed were filled with continued work, yet the mood shifted subtly. Both were aware of how much they had relied on each other, and how much they had learned from one another. Yana's family had begun to accept Tom's presence as helpful and respectful, though always with cautious awareness. And Tom realized that he was not just helping with land and fences. He was participating in a relationship built on mutual respect, trust, and understanding. Challenges continued to emerge. Winter was approaching, and with it came the first cold snaps that required preparing shelters for the animals and reinforcing the fences. Some neighbors were skeptical of the friendship between the rancher and the young Apache woman, and some whispered disapprovingly. Tom felt the weight of these opinions but chose not to let them interfere. His focus remained on the land, the work, and the growing trust he had established with Ayana. Yana noticed the subtle pressures as well. She had grown up learning to handle judgment and skepticism from outsiders. It was a skill she had honed through years of observation and experience. But now, with Tom's consistent presence and proven sincerity, she found herself less guarded. While she maintained awareness, she also allowed herself to see the positive impact of collaboration and trust. One morning, a particularly strong wind swept across the fields, knocking over some of the newly repaired fences and damaging part of the crops. The setback was discouraging, but neither faltered. Together, they worked through the damage, repairing, reinforcing, and protecting the land. It was exhausting work, yet both felt a sense of purpose in their shared effort. Every repaired fence, every saved crop, became a symbol of their growing commitment to responsibility and care. During these weeks, conversations grew deeper. Yana shared more about the traditions of her people, stories that had been passed down through generations, and lessons about respecting nature, life, and community. Tom shared stories of his own upbringing, the challenges of maintaining a ranch, and the values he had learned from his parents. These stories were not just entertainment. They were lessons, bridges between worlds, and a way of understanding each other beyond superficial appearances. As winter approached fully, there was a quiet sense of accomplishment. The land had been protected, the fences repaired, and a deeper trust had grown between them. The challenges they had faced, the fires, the storms, and the setbacks, had not weakened their bond. Instead, it had strengthened it. They had learned that true connection required effort, consistency, and honesty in every action. Yet, with these achievements came reflection. Both understood that their relationship, built on actions and shared responsibility, had consequences beyond themselves. Tom realized that his choices affected not only the land, but also the trust of the family and community. Yana recognized that her acceptance of his help carried weight, and that trust, once given, must be respected and nurtured. One evening, as they prepared to leave the field after a long day, Tom turned to Ayana. "We've faced a lot together," he said quietly. "I don't say this lightly, but I'm glad to have been here." Ayana looked at him, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "So am I," she replied. "Not because you're here every day, but because of what you've done, what you've shown." It was a quiet, meaningful acknowledgement. Words had their place, but it was the actions, the consistent effort, and the reliability that had created something lasting. Both understood that this was more than a simple friendship. It was a connection rooted in trust, respect, and the shared experience of working through challenges together. As they walked back to their respective homes, the cold wind carried a sense of clarity. The consequences of their actions were evident, not just in the repaired fences or the saved crops, but in the deepening trust and understanding between them. They had proven to themselves and to each other that genuine effort mattered more than words. They had faced trials, overcome obstacles, and emerged stronger for it. And in that quiet, cold evening, as the stars began to appear in the sky, both Tom and Ayanna knew that the foundation they had built would endure. Actions had spoken louder than words, and consequences had proven the strength of their connection. What had begun as cautious observation and polite interaction had grown into something meaningful, something that could not be taken lightly or ignored. In this way, the story of trust, effort, and responsibility continued to unfold. Both understood that challenges would keep coming, but they were ready to face them together. The bond they shared was no longer fragile. It had been tested, proven, and strengthened by consequence and care. And as they turned toward the darkening horizon, both felt a quiet confidence that, together, they could meet whatever challenges lay ahead. Winter had fully arrived, and the desert landscape had changed from the golden hues of autumn to the muted browns and grays of cold months. The mornings were sharp and brisk, with frost covering the ground, and the nights brought a deep, quiet darkness that seemed to stretch endlessly. Both Tom and Ayanna were awake before sunrise, carrying on their routines with steady determination. Months of effort, trust, and shared challenges had brought them closer, but this final chapter would show the culmination of everything they had learned and built together. Tom stepped outside his ranch house, taking a deep breath of the cold morning air. His eyes scanned the horizon, noting the subtle changes in the land, the dry brush, the patches of frost on the grass, and the steady movement of his cattle. Winter was always the hardest season. Fences would freeze, animals needed extra care, and the soil became less forgiving. But this year felt different. He wasn't facing the season alone. Ayanna had become not just a neighbor but a reliable partner in understanding and protecting the land. Meanwhile, Ayanna was already outside, tending to the family's small herd of goats. She moved quickly, efficiently, and with a calm focus that only came from experience. Her hands, though small, were strong and capable, guiding the animals and checking on their health. When she noticed Tom walking toward her from the boundary line, she gave a small nod, acknowledging his presence without breaking the rhythm of her work. "Morning," Tom said, his voice warm but quiet. "Morning," she replied, her tone calm but carrying an ease that reflected their growing familiarity. The tasks for the day were clear: check the fences, ensure the animals had enough food and water, and repair any damage caused by the harsh winter winds. But there was an unspoken understanding between them now. They didn't need to plan every step or explain every action. Their months of shared work and trust had created a rhythm, a silent language of gestures and cooperation that made even difficult tasks easier. As they worked together along the fence line, Tom carried heavy posts while Ayanna held them steady and hammered nails with precision. The cold air bit at their fingers and faces, but neither complained. Their focus was on the land, the animals, and each other. Every action mattered because they had learned the importance of reliability, consistency, and care. The lessons of the past months were visible in every movement, every decision, and every shared glance. During a break, they sat on a fallen log, sipping water and watching the frost glisten in the sunlight. The silence was comfortable, filled with the quiet knowledge that their efforts had built something more than just physical improvements. They had built trust, respect, and a shared understanding that went beyond words. "You've done a lot this year," Ayanna said quietly. "Not just for the land, but for my family. I've noticed and I appreciate it." Tom smiled, feeling the weight of her words. "I didn't do it for recognition," he said. "I did it because it was right, because helping matters more than talking about it. Her eyes softened, reflecting both gratitude and something deeper. I can see that. Actions speak louder than words, and you've shown me that consistently. That's more than I expected from anyone outside our world. Tom nodded, understanding completely. Their connection was not about flattery or idle promises. It was about consistency, effort, and integrity. The months of shared labor, facing challenges together, and learning from each other had created something rare and lasting. As the day progressed, a strong gust of wind swept across the land, threatening to topple a section of the newly repaired fence. Without hesitation, Tom moved to brace the posts while Ayanna reinforced the connections with nails and wire. They worked seamlessly, anticipating each other's actions, their combined skills and understanding turning a potential disaster into a success. When the fence stood firm, they both exhaled, feeling the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. Later, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the frost-covered ground, Tom and Ayanna walked toward the edge of the property. The winter air was crisp, and the sky glowed with soft oranges and purples. The stillness of the moment was a reflection of the trust and connection they had built, a peaceful pause after months of effort and challenges. I never imagined this year would be like this, Tom said quietly. Meeting you, learning from you, and working together, it's changed how I see a lot of things. Ayanna looked at him, her gaze steady and thoughtful. It's changed me too. I've learned that people can surprise you, that trust is built with effort, and that actions really do speak louder than words. Not everyone proves themselves, but you have. The honesty in her voice touched him. Months of shared experiences had created a bond that was rare and meaningful. They had faced dangers, overcome setbacks, and proven themselves through effort and care, not through promises or empty words. And now, in this quiet winter evening, they could reflect on how far they had come. Winter brought other challenges as well. A sudden snowstorm covered the land in a thin layer of white, making it difficult to see fences and paths. The animals were restless, seeking shelter from the cold. Tom and Ayanna worked side by side, moving animals to safer areas, clearing snow from fences and reinforcing weak spots. The work was exhausting, but the teamwork and trust they had developed made it manageable. During the storm, they found a moment of quiet together under a large tree, watching snowflakes drift to the ground. "It's beautiful," Ayanna said softly, her voice filled with wonder. "Even in the cold, even in the challenges, there's beauty if you look carefully." Tom nodded. "Just like our work this year, even in difficulties, there's something to be learned, something to appreciate, and having someone to share it with makes it better." Her eyes met his, and for a moment, words were unnecessary. The connection they had built, through labor, trust, and shared experiences, was visible in their actions, their presence, and the quiet understanding between them. It was a bond that did not need constant explanation. It existed naturally, formed through months of effort and sincerity. As the storm passed and the sun returned, the land revealed its quiet resilience. Frost-covered crops glistened, fences stood firm, and the animals were safe and calm. Tom and Ayanna continued their work, repairing minor damage and checking on the land, each movement reflecting the lessons they had learned. Patience, effort, and care were the foundations of lasting results. By the time evening arrived, both were tired but satisfied. The day had tested their endurance, skills, and coordination, yet they had succeeded. Sitting together near the boundary, they reflected on the year, the storms, the fires, the challenges, and the growth. Everything they had faced had strengthened their trust, respect, and understanding. "You've kept your promise," Ayanna said, her tone calm but filled with acknowledgement. "Not with words but with actions. I can see it every day." Tom smiled, feeling the warmth of her recognition. "I wanted to show it, not just say it. I've learned that's what matters most." The statement was simple, but it carried the weight of months of experience. Both knew that the bond they shared was rare, built not on words or fleeting gestures, but on consistent effort, mutual respect, and a willingness to face challenges together. As winter continued, their days became a mixture of work, reflection, and quiet companionship. The land, now resilient and cared for, reflected their efforts. The fences stood firm, the crops were protected, and the animals thrived. But beyond the physical accomplishments, the most important result was the trust, respect, and understanding that had grown between them. In this final chapter, both Tom and Ayanna realized that the journey had taught them more than just practical skills. They had learned about patience, the value of consistency, and the quiet power of actions over words. They had discovered the strength of partnership, the meaning of responsibility, and the deep satisfaction that comes from genuine effort and shared purpose. As night fell and stars filled the sky, both stood near the boundary, looking out over the land they had nurtured and protected. The winter air was cold, but it carried a sense of accomplishment and peace. They had faced challenges, overcome obstacles, and built something lasting. Their connection was strong, resilient, and meaningful, a bond proven through action, trust, and care. And in that quiet winter night, both Tom and Ayanna understood the ultimate lesson. Words can promise, but actions prove. Trust is fragile, but it grows strong through effort. Challenges will come, but with consistency, respect, and cooperation, anything can be faced together. Their journey, though grounded in simple daily work, had become a story of real-life courage, patience, and genuine connection. In the cold, clear night, the desert was silent except for the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant sounds of animals. Tom and Ayanna shared a quiet moment, knowing that what they had built would endure, not because it had been spoken about, but because it had been proven through actions. And that, they realized, was the truest form of trust, respect, and understanding.